Hello and welcome to the Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell.
And I'm Malik.
Malik!
I was waiting for that.
Welcome back to the show.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always great to be here, Hyle.
Well, this is kind of a place setter of an episode. This is a return to normalcy. DK Vine's kind of been a bit shambolic the last couple of weeks, but I am happy to report with this episode, we are back in business. I have officially moved. I am now set up properly to do Kongversations. The Idaho crew has finished moving, and half the gang is returning from PAX as we speak. So we will be resuming regular content, and we will be resuming regular episodes of the Kongversation in this, the final couple of weeks of Stinky Ape Summer here in the Northern Hemisphere.
Very, very nice.
Yeah, and Malik, it's summer for you too, technically, for the both of us.
Yeah.
We're both above the equator. And as I've grown older and I no longer have to, go back to school, I'm no longer bound by that set calendar of when the cultural summer is. Like, you go back to school, summer's over, it's fall, deal with it, suck it up. Because I don't have that hanging over my head anymore. It's one of the benefits, one of the perks of being an adult is, you work all summer anyway. So what does it becoming September really mean? But because there's no marker for the end of cultural summer for me, this couple of weeks at the end of summer has become my favorite period of time for the season, because it's still technically summer. You're still going to get sunny weather. It might be a little bit too hot for your taste, but it's starting to cool down. You'll get a cool day here or there. Places are no longer just teeming with throngs of writhing masses. It's just, it's mellowed out everywhere. You can kind of come and go as you please. And you get all of the cool Halloween shit as well. So, it's kind of a win-win all around. So I'm looking forward to the last couple of weeks of Stinky Ape Summer. We're going to have some great episodes lined up for you as we round out your summer season going into autumn. Or if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, like our friend Freezer in the live stream chat, we're going to get you ready for spring. So there you go. And, it being the end of summer, we recently passed another 25th anniversary, because this was the big summer of the 25th anniversary of Banjo-Kazooie, as I'm sure you're aware, Malik. But this 25th anniversary, it's a little bit more minor, all things considered, and it's one that DK Vine would have historically ignored. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm talking about, because I invited you to be on this episode. It's the 25th anniversary of the Donkey Kong Country cartoons premiere in the United States. When I said it's more minor, that wasn't me just slagging off on the cartoon as I want to do. It's because, it's one region's premiere for the cartoon, but it was already in France. It was already in Canada. We were getting it like 2 years reheated leftovers, right? Like it wasn't new to you at the time. So
no.
But it being the early days of the internet, before we had these vast international communities comparing notes with each other, I didn't know about the Donkey Kong Country cartoons. So August 5th, 1998, I sat down to watch it, all anxious. It was like Christmas morning for me. And I didn't know this was like a show that had been on the air for 2 years in France, a year in Canada. I had no inkling that this was anything. I didn't know the history. And, well, my reaction we'll get into, but I want to be clear about something up front as we begin this episode. So I am still not what you would call a fan of the Donkey Kong Country cartoon series. However, this episode will not be me just burying it or ragging on it as I've historically done. I will be pointing out some of my issues that I had with it, at the very least back in the day. Maybe some that are still kind of niggling at my soul in the present. But this episode is more about recent developments in my psyche. It's about how I have come to, at the very least, a reluctant peace with the cartoon's existence. I am no longer trying to convince people on my little soapbox that the cartoon is not good or it's beneath the standards that we should expect from a property bearing the trademark Donkey Kong Country. I passed that shit, Malik. Don't worry. I no longer feel like there is an existential war for the soul of Donkey Kong, which makes all of this sound far more dramatic than it actually ever was. It has been a quarter century. We have a new animated interpretation of the Kongs that has recently left theaters. It's on physical home media. It's on Peacock right now. You can buy it on demand. But you know, we've got that. We've got video game Donkey Kong having gone through multiple developers since 1998. So I just have to let it go, Malik. And that's what this episode is about. It's about how I let go of my demons. How I made peace with the Donkey Kong Country cartoon. So
that's good. I'm glad you could grow from that, Hyle.
Well, and I wanted to bring you in because you are, of course, the cartoon gamer, and you are an avowed fan of the Donkey Kong Country cartoon. So you're here to balance out my bad juju. And I'm not talking about Mumbo Jumbo's beloved totem pole from Banjo-Kazooie. You are here to be the sugar to my saltiness. You are here for every fan of the cartoon who would disagree with every bad word I would ever say about it.
Now, I wouldn't say I would disagree with every bad thing that you say about it, but I would say I'm very forgiving of the show. But don't worry, I'll be right there with you on some of these things because I have been watching the show shockingly, if you can believe it, for the first time front to back for, I guess I'll say it now because I'm making a video on the DKC cartoon. And I was like, I should probably give this thing, a fair shake and watch it all. And yeah, I got quite a few things to say about it. I'll agree with you on some things and a couple other things I will explain. And yeah, it's going to be great.
Yeah. And I do want to clarify that yes, for extremely long time Kongversation listeners, the Kongversation did do a two-parter on the Donkey Kong Country cartoon way back in our garbage trash fire first season. So this is less of a summary of the cartoon. We're not going over the complete history. We're not going over Donkey Kong Planet or whatever that show is called. We're not getting into any of the weird bon mots they fired the writers because of all the sexy racist jokes.
I wrote a note about that. Okay.
You can bring it up. You can bring it up. I'm just saying we're not going to give a comprehensive history of the show. This is more to explain how DK Vine as an entity has softened on the cartoon since 2013 or so. But actually the history starts before that. Because, I'm not the same guy I was, Malik. I have grown up a fair bit in these last 10 plus years, and that includes my perspective on children's cartoons. So, yeah. I hope this episode will be a catharsis for all of us. But before I dig into it, I have some due diligence. And the most important due diligence at the front is a hearty rest in peace to our fake sponsor from the last Stinky Ape summer, Jimmy Buffett. Jimmy Buffett passed away this past Labor Day weekend, and whatever you may think about Mr. Buffett's musical output, whether you're a fan, whether you would not consider yourself a parrot head whatsoever, I think it's safe to say that he has left a mark on the beach-going culture of the Gulf Coast and down into the Caribbean and wherever you may celebrate with a nice frosty margarita. And does make me think we should really get some real sponsors here on the conversation because, we only really have fake ones and then, we get them killed. So rest in peace, Jimmy Buffett. Thank you for all the memories and for the songs in which you will be immortalized.
I didn't know who he was until he passed away.
Oh no! Oh no! Okay, so yeah,
I've heard the name.
Yeah, he's the guy who does like all the songs about going to the beach and getting drunk with like regret and shame and yeah.
Okay, I've heard him before then.
Yeah. Because we don't have real sponsors on the conversation, I do need to plug our Patreon. It's at dkvine.com/Patreon or patreon.com/dkvine. Yes, we have no legitimate sponsors and our fake ones are now deceased. So we get by solely on the good support of you. So if you want to support DK Vine, then check us out on our Patreon. We also have a merchandise store, and just in time for cooler weather, assuming, you're heading into cooler weather, we have our old school shirt now available as a long sleeve t-shirt, a crew neck sweater, or a hoodie. This is the shirt that is a Kong College, sort of, varsity shirt, celebrating, Wrinkly Kong School from off of Donkey Kong Country 2 and Donkey Kong Land 2. And you can get yours right now at dkvine.com/merchandise or just finding us on TeePublic. Malik, you mentioned that you have a YouTube channel and that you're working on a video about the Donkey Kong Country cartoon. Would you like to give a quick plug to the life and times of the Cartoon Gamer?
Okay, I like how you worded that. That makes me sound more important than I actually am.
You're more important than I am, so,
Oh, come
embrace
on.
it. Embrace it.
So, okay, fine. Just for now, I will. So, I got a channel. I'm the Cartoon Gamer. I do stuff for Did You Know Gaming and other people and things like that. But my channel, I talk about video games, cartoons, a lot of stuff from Canada. I was in the middle of Donkey Kong Marathon, the Kong-a-thon, I'll unofficially call it. But yeah, this is my way of doing Canadian content quota and talking about Donkey Kong. So, stay tuned for that video when it comes out. And if it's already come out, I hope you didn't hate it.
Well, I loved all your videos on the games, so I will look forward to the video on the cartoon, even though that's not my area of expertise. Because obviously, I am a Donkey Kong Country video game fanatic. I am a first generation DKC fan. I got on board the very week it came out, renting in a Blockbuster Video. But even before then, I saw the commercials for DKC and I was like, oh my god, this looks like the most amazing game ever. Mm-hmm. And it turned out it was actually the most amazing game ever, at least until Donkey Kong Country 2 came out a year after. Yeah. I first learned of the existence of the Donkey Kong Country cartoon show. Like the very existence, the very idea of it, by reading my parents' TV Guide. TV Guide, of course, is still a magazine published here in the US. Historically, it's been known for having the TV listings, like before the era of streaming, before the era of even those channels that would tell you what everything is on. You've learned what was on and when by reading the TV Guide schedule.
I never knew about TV Guides myself, actually. I've never seen one in the wild. So I'll take your word for it. It's
an archaic, outdated concept. They still publish TV Guide, but I don't know what it actually entails nowadays. But I would thumb through my parents' copy because it would arrive in the mail every week. And, it's like, well, what's going to be on TV? What's going to be on TV? Because this is still, it's getting online around this time, but I was not, I had one foot in the old world, let's say. So I was reading TV Guide. And it was interesting because this was the month that the cable channel, the Family Channel, which was mostly known for like family fare. It started off as a religious-based channel, and it kind of became a little bit more secular by airing reruns of the Adam West Batman show, among other things.
Yeah. Not to be confused with the Family Channel in Canada, which was basically our Disney Channel for like 20 years.
Yeah. Well, the Family Channel had been purchased by 20th Century Fox, and Fox was rebranding it as the Fox Family Channel, and that would go into effect at noon on August 15th, 1998. So I was like, well, a new cable channel. It's basically in the paradigm of Fox Kids, the programming block on the Fox television network that would air a lot of popular kids programming of the 1990s, like Batman the Animated Series, talking about Batman again. But it also, was the home of the Power Rangers. I think Animaniacs,
Digimon, the new Woody Woodpecker show in the late 90s.
So a whole cable channel, in that model was still intriguing to me, even though I was kind of aging out of Fox Kids and Nickelodeon and all of that. I still was intrigued. What cool stuff might they be airing? And I thought my eyes were deceiving me when I saw a listing for Donkey Kong Country. There's no description because I think TV Guide only gave like little paragraph or like 2-sentence bylines for shows in the prime time block, like 8 to 11. If it was just during the day, they would just give a listing for the TV show, no description whatsoever. So I just saw a show called Donkey Kong Country. And that was it. That was all I had to go off of, Malik. All I knew was that Donkey Kong Country would premiere August 15th, 1998 on the Fox Family Channel. And usually got TV Guide a week or maybe even 2 weeks before the actual schedule kicked in. So that would lead to a lot of anticipation. Like if you were a kid and you actually like cared about watching TV, you're like, ooh, I'm really interested in this program. I can't wait for it. Let the hype commence in my brain. Sort of like the video game hype cycle I talked about earlier this season, but on a much smaller and more pathetic scale.
Yeah.
So I remember my family went to the beach for our annual like beach trip the weekend before the premiere. So the weekend of like August 8th. And so that beach trip, I was thinking about two things. How to get the ice key on Banjo-Kazooie. Because, Banjo-Kazooie was still recent in my head. And I was, imagining, Treasure Trove Cove, I'm at the beach,
Shark!
Yeah. So there's a lot of that in my head. And I was also fantasizing about what this Donkey Kong Country cartoon might possibly be about, what beloved characters might appear, how it would be adapted. Like, how would you adapt Donkey Kong Country? Because up until this point, we had gotten 3 Donkey Kong Country games, 3 Donkey Kong Land games, and Diddy Kong Racing, and Donkey Kong appeared in Mario Kart 64. Now, I had no way of knowing that the cartoon was basically 2 years old, or that, it was pulling from DKC and DKC 2, and then, of course, it couldn't pull from DKC 3 because that came out after it had already premiered. I didn't know any of that. I just knew they were making a Donkey Kong Country cartoon. So I distinctly remember I had certain thoughts.
Your mind probably just wandered.
Yeah. Would the animal buddies be in it? Like, I was certain, Malik, at the very least, that our good buddy Rambi would be in it. Because it's such a stark and resounding visual when you first play Donkey Kong Country, this gorilla and this monkey riding a rhinoceros.
Yeah.
This is what everybody remembers. It's why Retro brought back Rambi in Donkey Kong Country Returns above all other animal buddies. So I was certain at the very least, Rambi will be in the DKC cartoon. And I also got very excited about other possibilities, like, say, Swanky Kong as a character. I thought, Swanky, that would be a fun, perfect sort of side character for an ongoing Donkey Kong cartoon. Like, I wasn't thinking about how they would structure it per se, or like it would be basically patterned after a network sitcom from the 1970s. But I was thinking, you're going to have a reoccurring cast of characters, and who would be a fun character with a lot of potential for humor? Swanky Kong. So, all around, I was setting myself up for disappointment.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Because the thing was, Malik, like, Donkey Kong Country was my biggest fandom, my most intense fandom I had ever had in my young, short life. At that point, like, I had liked other things. Like, I think going down the list, Pee-wee's Playhouse. I was big into Pee-wee's Playhouse, Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Ghostbusters. I was into the real Ghostbusters. And then I, Batman sort of became an evergreen for me, but like everything kind of fell short compared to Donkey Kong Country. That was mine. That was the first thing where it just felt like every aspect of it appealed to me, and it made me feel like a part of it belonged to me. Like I had that little possessive lizard fandom part of my brain activated. Like this is mine. And I want it done perfectly, because we had never had an adaptation, at least in the West, of Donkey Kong Country. Mario, grew up with the Super Mario Brothers Super Show and seen Mario comics. And of course, I was aware Sonic the Hedgehog had it. Donkey Kong Country was something I had entertained the possibility of it getting an adaptation since it came out. But part of me didn't know if it was ever going to happen. So to have myself be on the precipice of it, at least as far as the US market was concerned, it was very exciting, but also kind of nerve-wracking a little bit. And yeah, like part of me briefly considered the possibility that I might not like it, because it would fail to meet the parameters my brain set for it. That turned out to be entirely accurate, but I didn't listen to that part of my brain before August 15th. But, I like I said, I didn't know that the show had already premiered to the north of me in Canada, and that somebody like Malik would be watching it before I ever even knew of its existence.
So this is weird for me, because I come at it from a completely different place, because, so let's see, I had already played the Donkey Kong Country games, well, just the first one. If you see my video talking about my, history with the DKC games, the first game was the only one I had. It was basically in the house before I was even born, and I would play that when I was like 4 years old or 3 years old or whatever, and then the Donkey Kong Country show, it was one of the first shows on Teletoon, which the uninitiated will tell you was our Cartoon Network equivalent, but we did have a lot of Cartoon Network imports, but it was more than that, especially early on, and Donkey Kong Country was one of the, big shows that was being touted as, look at all this different stuff that we got from all over the world and our own stuff. Donkey Kong Country is, leading in terms of, 3D animation. It's going to be great. So, Donkey Kong, the TV show, I didn't have any, expectations, especially as, a 4-year-old. I just remember seeing it. One of my earliest memories is just seeing it at 5:30 in the morning or something. And yeah, it was just kind of always there. And yeah, again, I was 3 or 4 years old, so I really didn't have much in the way of what to expect. But I was just happy to see that my favorite characters, even at the time, they were talking and doing things, and I could follow along very vaguely. But I was like, okay, yeah, this looks like Donkey Kong. This is Donkey Kong Country.
Sure.
And DK's teeth are kind of freaking me out. That was it.
I'll say my first good thing about the cartoon. I like Donkey Kong's teeth in the cartoon a lot more than the teeth he would really adopt in the buyout era of Donkey Kong. Like the big ghastly toothy grin. I like that his cartoon teeth at least resemble more of a real gorilla's teeth.
They're terrifying. Sometimes they'll just come out and they're like, "Oh my god!"
I still don't have a problem with them. That was one aspect I did not have a problem with.
He looks like a shark.
Yeah.
Speaking of the beach and the shark, but I'm in the opposite direction where I'm like, oh man, he got a really good dentist after the DKC cartoon. He's got nice, as you've described it in the past. I'll say that the conversation you did back in the day on the DKC cartoon, that was one of the first ones I ever heard from you guys. I still have it on my first iPhone right beside me. But yeah, like I think you guys called like chiclet teeth.
Yeah, chiclet teeth.
I prefer the chiclet teeth.
Yeah, never been a fan of the chiclet teeth. I like that they've toned it down in the games at least, but I like the DKC cartoon teeth, and I like the Donkey Kong Racing trailer. You can see that Rare was starting to implement like teeth, so he wouldn't have the gummy grin at all times. But they were very like small teeth. It was a subtle little design choice. It wasn't like look at him, he has teeth, he's gonna chomp ya. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think that's the way a lot of our listeners would have probably felt about the Donkey Kong Country cartoon, Malik. Like for me, I was coming into it as an older Donkey Kong Country fan, because Donkey Kong Country in 1994, I think it hit me right at the right age where I wasn't too old to be cynical about it, but I wasn't young enough where it would just kind of be another cool thing. I think it hit me at the point in my life where I was just geared precisely for something like that to come along, and for me to become a hyper obsessive weirdo literalist when it comes to especially Rare's take on Donkey Kong. Of course, I've mellowed, throughout the buyout era into the returns era, into the Rare Renaissance. I mean, Donkey Kong's gone through multiple developers since then, and we've had all of them provide their own interpretation on the canon, which is all, coexist with past interpretations. But at the time, it was just Rare, really, as the auteur studio behind Donkey Kong Country and all of the characters. And even when Donkey Kong would appear in something like Mario Kart 64, Rare would still get this huge credit because they were the Donkey Kong studio. So I viewed like their word as like the word of God. It was the word of canon. And the comparison I always make when describing how I've historically felt about the Donkey Kong Country cartoon, it's how those weirdos who hate the Lord of the Rings film trilogy are like, because it somehow strays too afar from J.R.R. Tolkien's like literary work. And I'm just like, they're great movies and they get so much right. And it's like, yeah, but Tom Bombadil isn't in them. And I'm like, who cares? That character isn't necessary. And they're like, no, he is, because he is in the book. And so I'm kind of like that with Donkey Kong Country, because like the video games mean so much to me that I don't think at the age I was at in 1998 that any adaptation not done by Rare themselves would have passed the smell test for me. I think I would have found fault in it no matter what. But in my opinion, looking back on it, I do think my first impressions on the DKC cartoon were sullied. Sullied, I say, because the first episode that was shown to US audiences who weren't, jet-setting international travelers, it was actually the 19th episode of the series. So it was an episode knee-deep in the premise. And it was not designed to be an introductory episode. So new viewers who were like me, sitting around their television all day on August 15th, waiting for the premiere of Donkey Kong Country, were just kind of dropped in cold to this interpretation of Donkey Kong Country. So things like the crystal coconut were not explained whatsoever in this episode.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, and so it kind of felt like we should already know because, yes, it was the 19th episode of a show. So, as a Donkey Kong Country fanatic, I was put off immediately because this show was assuming I knew its language, I knew its world of Donkey Kong Country, so it almost felt passive-aggressive, like, oh, you don't know what the crystal coconut is, you fake fan?
It's like, what's wrong with you? this thing we just introduced. What kind of a fan are you?
So the episode that premiered August 15th, 1998, as kind of this preview of what you could expect from Fox Family, was the episode entitled I Spy with My Hairy Eye. Which is a terrible name because their eyes are not hairy.
Yeah, it just brings up horrible imagery, honestly.
Donkey Kong does not need to shave his eyeball. That's not part of the lore. This was a really weird episode about K. Rool builds a candy robot, which he calls a candy clone, to steal the crystal coconut, right? And so this episode started with Donkey and Diddy guarding the crystal coconut for Cranky. And they start, like, wishing for bananas. And it just, like, blinks into existence. Like, boom, boom. And they just make a pile of bananas. And I'm like, what the hell is happening? There's this magical device that can just blink things into existence. Is this I Dream of Genie? Like, this isn't Donkey Kong Country. And like there was such a heavy focus on the character of Candy Kong in this episode, and the interpretation of Candy is the biggest alteration from video games to the cartoon. And I'm just like, what is this? I don't like this.
I can imagine that. If I was your age and I was, if this happened like now, I guess, and I was popping into episode 19 for some reason, I would feel the same way. Like, what is even happening in this show?
Had they started with the traditional first episode, Bad Hair Day, I think I would have, if not embrace it, I think I would have at least warmed up to the concept a little bit because that they do take their time to explain everything in that episode.
They sit you down, they explain things. There are many times where I'm watching something with a friend or something, and they'll say, it's like, if you introduced me to the show with this episode here, this would have completely turned me off. And it's like, well, it's a good thing I didn't do that, now did I?
It's why I've never been able to get into the Star Wars Clone Wars cartoon, because everybody tells me, it gets really good. But I just can't get past the early episodes. And they tell me, well, you can skip past them. I'm like, I can't. I really can't. So yeah, I do think for something like this, first impressions do mean a lot. And of course, when I was expecting all of this grand stuff, I was expecting basically a 1-to-1 adaptation from the games, like maybe on a smaller scale. Like they wouldn't go on this huge grand adventure every episode, every week, but I was expecting something like kind of more like a hangout, just comfort food kind of show with the characters I loved. And it was just, I don't know. It like the whole structure of it, like I said, it's kind of modeled after a sitcom. So you have a lot of like just antagonism between the characters, like misunderstandings, like an episode of Three's Company, and characters get angry at each other and they're just always so hostile. But not like the fun kind of bitterness like the video game Cranky has. There's just, it felt almost mean-spirited to somebody who just loved these characters and loved their relationship. But again, I feel like had I started with any other episode other than I Spy with My Hairy Eye, which to this day remains one of the least favorite I've ever seen, I think maybe my opinion would have been a lot softer early on.
Interesting, because again, when I've been watching the series in the production order, and like, yeah, I won't get into the whole history of the show and whatnot, but yeah, like how we said, like the original writers were writers were fired because their scripts were terrible, and then the guys had to come in, Nelvana came in, and they had to write around the storyboards because 10 boards were already done, and I feel like the first season is god-awful.
Yeah.
To be perfectly honest, when I was watching the show and then I was thinking about watching the show in the past, seeing episodes here and there, I was like, I don't remember the episodes being this disjointed and structurally unsound. But then when episode 13 onward, it felt more in line with what I remember. And it's like, okay, this feels more in line with, what I liked about the show. So, yeah, it's interesting how you feel that way.
Yeah, I mean, again, I probably would have found fault with it no matter what. But it was just the biggest deflating thing of my Donkey Kong fandom to finally get an adaptation and have it be so profoundly disappointing, so weird, and there's almost like this uncanny valley thing going on. I'm not talking about the CG animation, which, it was impressive for its day. It didn't look as good as the video games, but for its budget, for what they had to work with, it's still pretty impressive to this day. But it was an uncanny valley because it was like taking things that I knew so well, that I thought about every day of my life, and just making them seem alien and unfamiliar. And it's like waking up and your parents have been replaced by pod people, aliens. And they might look like your parents, but then they just, go at you when they talk. And you're like, well, that's not my mom. That's not my dad.
Oh, that's great. I didn't expect that. I can see that.
If you had asked young Hyle what his biggest problem with the show was in 1998, he would have said with a straight face, well, it's the alterations to the continuity of Donkey Kong Country, because that's the way young me talked. It's what they changed unnecessarily from the games to the cartoon. And, in retrospect, this is kind of minor compared to other properties adaptations, especially from the 1990s. I mean, there's some big ones, sure, but Donkey Kong Island is renamed as Congo Bongo Island, and it doesn't look the same either. It's shaped like a banana, which, I can see why they did that, because
I can take that, yeah.
Donkey Kong Island is objectively a really shit name that we're kind of all just married to at this point. And while the, head shape, like the mountain that's carved in the face of Donkey Kong, or maybe Cranky Kong, or maybe one of their ancestors, that's a very striking image on the video game map screen. You kind of don't have a lot of real estate to work with in a cartoon, so you're gonna, elongate it, and then if you're gonna, what if we still make it a fun shape? Well, let's make it a banana. I get why they changed it, but that was a big strike one for me.
Mm-hmm. I'm still bothered that it's called Congo Bongo, to be honest.
Yeah, like, let's be honest, the Mushroom Kingdom is also kind of a shit name, but they left that for the Super Show. The crystal coconut was invented to be the MacGuffin of the show over the banana horde. And, again, I understand why they made that choice as an adult, but as a kid, that was another sin. Crocodile Isle is never referenced. The Kremlins just reside on Donkey Kong Island. Okay, that's sequel lore. Sure. If maybe they're just keeping to the first game on. Oh wait, there's Dixie Kong. Never mind. Wrinkly, Swanky, and the Animal Buddies, they're all missing in action, and in their place, we get new characters like Bluster Kong and Eddie the Mean Old Yeti, and, why are you bringing in new toys when you're not even playing with all the toys you have? King K. Rool, kind of given a hard split with the faction of Pirate Kremlings, like they're two separate factions, and for me, like, K. Rool being a part-time pirate's one of the most interesting things about him, but okay.
Yeah.
But all of that stuff seemed like such a big deal when you're a kid and when you really, really care what other people think. You're like, oh no, what if this cartoon sways people's opinions and they think this is the real Donkey Kong canon? Oh no. What will I do? But looking back, it is kind of laughable how minor all of that is as an adult, because the deviations made were, about on par with the changes the Super Mario Bros. Super Show and its follow-ups made to the Mario canon, or I guess the Sonic the Hedgehog cartoons made to Sonic canon. I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with either one, but probably.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Or even the changes that this year's Super Mario Bros. Movie made to Donkey Kong lore. It's all kind of just minor nonsense that you don't really need to get hung up on unless you're an obsessive literalist weirdo like I was. And still am to an extent, but, I've also grown up a little bit. Because...
yeah, same here.
A lot of that stuff, looking back as a failed screenwriter, I can at least recognize that, well, that stuff was in service to the structure of the cartoon and for it being a reoccurring, 22-minute adventure every week. A pile of bananas does not work as the centerpiece, as the MacGuffin of a TV show. You need consistency in kids' cartoons, especially when it comes to 3D models using rudimentary CG animation and a very limited budget. So,
yes.
You want K. Rool to have the same design throughout. You don't want him shifting personalities. If you just want him to stick in with that same CG model. And, then if you want to bring in Pirate Kremlings, why not just come up with a new character like Captain Scurvy? I get all of that now, right? But try telling that to a fanatical Rare zealot in 1998. I wasn't going to have it, Malik. I just couldn't abide by the changes.
Yeah, no, I can get that because, oh man, I just like how you say a pile of bananas does not work. They're not even like magic.
So a pile of bananas works in a video game because we've talked about the original Donkey Kong Country game before here on the Kongversation and throughout DK Vine, and our theory that so much of DKC is just a piss take when it comes to like making fun of video game conventions. Like instead of a princess getting kidnapped, it's a big pile of bananas. That's a garbage storyline, but it's supposed to be stupid. It's supposed to be kind of smirking at just how dumb video games are. King K. Rool, while he evolved into a really interesting, nuanced character, I think he was just originally your stock Bowser type baddie. Even his name is garbage. King K. Rool.
Yeah.
He became so much more than that, but in that first game, he's kind of just an afterthought. He's kind of just, here's the big lizard boss, whatever. It's the end.
Mm-hmm.
Donkey Kong Country was about taking video game conventions and elevating it with, state-of-the-art graphics and music and immersion, and everything else was kind of like an afterthought. It was half-baked on purpose, and it wasn't until we got to the subsequent games that, well, we started developing Donkey Kong lore and making it interesting, and oh wow, there's actually some meat on the bones of these characters. Oh, you can actually make K. Rool a really interesting guy. And what if we actually take Diddy Kong on this character arc? And oh, now Dixie Kong needs to go on a similar character arc because she's a really interesting character. And oops, we've actually accidentally created a really well-rounded cast of characters and a really interesting world. We didn't mean to, but we did. But
Yeah.
that base, that like ground zero of Donkey Kong Country in that first game, I do think it was a piss take. And there's not a lot to work with if you're taking that as your basis for a 22-minute kid show.
Yeah, I would say so. Because, yeah, like you just said, like, it works in the games. It's like, I don't really need a lot of motivation to go on an adventure. It's like something got stolen from me and I want it back. But yeah, in something like a cartoon like this, you need something more. Like, again, like the whole adventure thing. I would have loved to have seen them go on crazy adventures just to find little things here and there and maybe thwart the bad guys along the way. But even with the crystal coconut, like, I've just noticed, they'll just walk, like, the Kremlings will just walk up into their place and just steal it. The door is wide open, and they'll just take it, and then they'll give it back, and then someone will grab it, and it's just a constant back and forth, and yeah, but this MacGuffin does not really work as something gripping.
It's not gripping. It's not supposed to be gripping, really. Yeah, I really didn't like the fact that it was just, like, in the center of Cranky's floor plan. It was just in this like podium.
It's just right there.
he doesn't have like any locks on his place. You know, the doors are, like you said, wide open, and you can just walk right up and grab it, and it's like, oh, it's mine now. And then you're all powerful because it can grant any wish whatsoever. And why didn't, Donkey Kong just wish for the Kremlings to go away?
Yeah, it's like two dudes like playing at recess, and it's like, I got this soccer ball, and I'm going to take it from your fort that you made from like the trees over here, and I'm going to take it and steal it back. That's what I feel like it is with DK and the Kremlings in this show, and it's like...
it's essentially like all of the Infinity Stones from Marvel like wrapped into one, but instead of like there's this huge struggle for them, it's just this like it's just there in this complete package, and people pass it around like a hot potato, but nobody ever thinks to just wish away their enemies. Like, K-Rool gets it. The first thing you should do is just, like Thanos, snap his fingers and the Kongs turn to dust. And then, oh, problem solved. I win.
Yep.
But they don't do that. They don't do that. Buddy, they don't think.
I don't feel so good.
Yeah. So yeah. I think the Crystal Coconut is a better MacGuffin for the cartoon than a pile of bananas. But,
still sucks.
It still sucks, and it sucked watching the 19th episode and them not explaining what this thing was, and that just put me off, man. It just put a sour taste in my old mouth hole.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Like I said, I'd be in the same situation as you. It's like, what is this?
Now
you take me for some kind of fool.
Now, my second biggest problem, Malik, at the time, was that it was a musical.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this little picadillo of mine no doubt stemmed from young Hyle and his hang-ups, because as I've often talked about on the Kongversation, I did not like kids media of my youth. More or less. Like, of course I liked some of it, but I did not like the stuff made for kids that adults would then always show you because you were a kid. Because I didn't like to be talked down to or thought of as just a dumb kid. Even when I wanted to consume ostensibly kids programming or literature or whatever, I wanted to be thought of as a smart, clever little person. And so I gravitated to things that were more countercultural for kids, even if it was, still mainstream, like Nickelodeon. But Nickelodeon, in my opinion, didn't talk down to kids. It empowered kids. And so I was like, I like that. But I wasn't a Disney kid for that reason, because I felt like Disney was the kind of stuff that adults kind of pushed on kids, and it didn't interest me. And so any cartoon that was a musical, I would immediately raise my eyebrow and be like, come on.
Why are you singing?
Yeah, why are you singing? I didn't understand musicals at that age. Didn't appeal to me, but because this was the era of the Disney Renaissance, and so those films were everywhere if you were a kid.
Yep.
I felt like I had to kind of rebel against them. And so any cartoon, any animated production that had songs in it, I was just not going to like it. And because of that, I always felt like I had to rebel a little bit and seek out things like, well, Donkey Kong Country. So to have my favorite thing in the entire world become
what you hated.
Yeah. Like a really bad take on a Disney style musical. Oh my God. That was a slap in the face, Malik. It felt like
Donkey Kong used to tell you to hawk a loogie at life. Now they're hawking the loogie back at you.
And they're making you swallow it.
As they sing.
Yeah. I can't imagine anything designed to turn off young me more than sticking 2 songs in an episode. You have very limited time anyway, right? And you're sticking 2 music numbers in most episodes. Ugh.
Most shows are lucky to get 5 songs in their run. God, you got 2. My goodness.
Now, in retrospect, I can admit some of the songs are fun in a very cheesy sort of way. Some of them are catchy, but I was just never going to like this element. It was just never going to win me over. And I think that was just like, had the cartoon been faithful, incredibly faithful to the games, that would have been one thing, but then when they started breaking out in song, I would have turned white as a sheet.
You think so? If Donkey Kong just busted out a microphone at the end of the DKC 1 or 2, that would have freaked you out?
And this was before the DK rap even. Like this was 1998, so this is before the DK rap, Donkey Kong playing bongos. Like
before his musical career really took off.
Yeah, like maybe now if they made a new Donkey Kong Country cartoon and all knowledge of the previous one was stripped from my brain and Donkey Kong just busted out in a song, I would be like, I guess that makes sense. I guess.
He did play like All Star and a bunch of other things on the bongos like 20 years ago. So
right.
Yeah, I can see this happening.
Yeah, that was my second biggest problem, Malik.
I mean, I like the song. I guess I can say just a little bit of what I think about the songs as well. Like, I was listening to one, like, just the entire day today, and I was like, you know what? This is really, really good stuff. This is actually well put together. I really like it. In the context of the show, yeah, again, when you say that they just bust out and start singing it, sometimes, especially in the first season, there is no build up to it whatsoever. There's not even like a drum beat in the background or things like that. They'll just like, oh, there's this terrible thing going on. Let me sing for 2 minutes before we get to it, okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I can see where you're coming from that.
I remember when they first started breaking out a song, my first thought was, I hope my parents aren't like walking into the room during this.
Like you're sweating under your pits.
Yeah, it's like I'm watching pornography or something. It's like,
what's going on here?
Oh my god, I'm ashamed.
They better not break out into like Wheels on the Bus or so. I'm half expecting Donkey Kong to start singing about the wheels on the bus going round and round. It's like, that's when I'm done.
Ditties from Donkey Konga.
Yeah, just give it a few years.
So, all that being said, the structure of it was my third biggest problem because, like I said, there is a very rote sitcom-like structure to the show. And because of that, the humor is so tonally different from what we got with Rare. And this doesn't feel like a huge problem nowadays, especially since we are so far removed from Rare's era with the franchise. Because when Rare was the sole creative force behind Donkey Kong and the DKU as a whole, aside from cameo things like Mario Kart 64,
Yeah.
the stark difference between their take on Donkey Kong and any adaptation, be it the cartoon or some manga that we wouldn't have translated over here for a decade and a half, or an errant like kids book or comic strip. It was just this huge tonal divide that it seemed like very few people got what Rare was doing. They had, their dry British sensibilities when it came to the humor. And what I really appreciated about the humor of Donkey Kong Country, Rare era, was it felt like it wasn't talking down to you. Like, that was my biggest thing as a kid, right? Don't talk down to me. Treat me like I have some modicum of intelligence. And
yeah,
it felt like the characters had a bit of bite to them. Like, not just Cranky Kong, but there was this mischievousness to it all. Like, Funky Kong blatantly hits on Candy Kong in front of Donkey Kong, and there would be innuendos, from time to time. And the Donkey Kong Country cartoon could certainly be subversive at times, and in ways I didn't pick up on as a kid, or, like in episodes that aired after I'd given up on the show entirely. But
yeah,
the characters were drawn a bit broad and in service of that aforementioned sitcom like Three's Company structure. Like, for example, I fully recognize that the video game Candy Kong, especially from her only appearance at the time of production in Donkey Kong Country, she was not a compelling character to draw from whatsoever. There is nothing going on with OG Candy Kong. I recognize
had to
that.
do something.
But I feel like they turned Candy into, and this is one of the biggest pratfalls I think a writer of a sitcom of that era, or any era, could make. And it's one that, like, I even parodied when I did my little sitcom. It's the stock Killjoy lady character. The one who is the serious, responsible one of the entire cast. Like, she is the only one who has a sensible head on her shoulders. And because of that, she is serious, she is stern, she ruins the boys' fun, and it kind of creates this contrast where you're like, oh, I see, I'm not misogynistic, I'm writing this character, the only sensible character is a lady. Okay, but in the context of all of this, she's then the one who's not fun. She's the one who is just kind of the fly in the ointment. And I feel like that also made her virtually unrecognizable from her canonical depiction, even though, Candy was just this kind of one-off joke character in the original game. Oh, what if a 1950s pinup was a gorilla?
Yeah.
So, like, I recognize Candy has always kind of been problematic no matter what angle you approach her from, but I do not enjoy cartoon Candy.
No, she's terrible. She's so mean. And, like, if you stick with it, which I understand people would not do after seeing Candy, even in her first appearance, she does get better, ever so slightly better, but she is just so unlikable in those first few episodes. Like, again, like you've seen the thing where she like slips on a banana peel and she's like, "Our date is off, Donkey Kong. Don't call me. Don't drop by." ever. It's like,
right.
whoa.
It's like, okay, if she's wired like this, and I'm not talking about the Candy Kong robot, like, I'm not talking literally wired. If this is the way she is, what does she see in Donkey Kong? And what does Donkey Kong see in her? Like, what
does Bluster see in her?
Right. What is, like, I realize she's the only adult woman in this cartoon, so it just kind of becomes the whole Smurfette thing, but seriously, like, she is just so unpleasant, and that is just the biggest mistake you can make when crafting any show where you like it's mostly like a boys club and you have one woman in there and she's just mean because, you know, like, oh, that's what makes it spicy. Well, no, that's just what like makes her an unlikable character. Like, why can't she be why can't she be like one of the gang? Just one of the gang, you know? I don't know.
And like one of the writers on the show, Erica Strobel, she was like integral in getting the show back on track after the original writers were fired.
Yeah.
She hated Candy Kong with a passion.
Oh, really?
Well. Yeah, let me see. I can find the quote here as I was putting together my video for the DKC cartoon.
Okay.
She said, "I have to say, I really hated Candy. Just looking at her weird design made me cringe. She looked like a burn victim." But she did hate Candy. She really hated Candy Kong.
And, you know, we've recently seen the concept art for a lot of the characters who were proposed for the show. Some who did not make the cut, like Rambi, Espresso, Winky. At one time, they toyed with the idea of bringing them into the cartoon, but there is some concept art for Candy, taking her design from DKC and sort of toning it down a little bit, making it a little bit more palatable for a family audience. And I really like the way this Candy Kong looks.
Yeah, me too. Like, I'm not sure if they were trying to draw a swimsuit. She doesn't look like she's like wearing anything, really. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think she's got like a one piece.
Yeah.
But she looks like DKC Candy Kong with like braided hair, like
and the
pigtails
bow tie,
almost.
Yeah.
Cute. And she looks like a really like cute, fun character. She doesn't look mean. She doesn't have a permanent scowl on her face. And
I'm just picturing it now, like, oh God, just stop scowling at me, please.
It's not just Candy. It's like the whole like structure of the show. I feel like most plots involve misunderstandings with characters. Like the one I always go back to, and the one I always talk about, always gripe about, is the episode where Diddy Kong thinks that Donkey Kong is after Dixie Kong. Like he wants to steal Dixie away from Diddy.
Yes. I'm like, whoa, dude.
Yeah, I mean, for as problematic as that is, just the inherent nature of it, just like all the characters were always like suspicious of each other and always just like, I don't know, there was always just this underlying hostility that was off-putting for me. 'Cause I wanted a fun hangout with the characters that I loved and who I presumed loved each other. And you very seldom got that. And I think like the core interpretations of the characters like Donkey Kong, Diddy Kong, even Cranky Kong to an extent, I think like they were basically there. Like I don't really have too much of an issue with the way most of the characters were portrayed. I just have an issue with the way they interacted with each other.
Like in that very same episode, what was it? Yeah, everyone thinks that DK's doing stuff, and he's not doing it. They don't give him a chance to talk about it. And then finally, Cranky draws the line when he sees a bunch of banana peels in his house, and he's like, I am banishing you to the mountains for the rest of your days. So he's basically just going to starve and freeze to death. And I'm like, wow, you think he committed murder or something.
Right, like video game Cranky Kong is a bit of a bitch. He's cynical and sarcastic, but there is a heart to him. And he would never banish his son/grandson into the hinterlands for any reason. So yeah, like for as much as we talk about how salty Rare's humor could be, there was a heart to it that I feel like the cartoon maybe missed the point of at times.
Yeah, at times. Watching the show, there is a little bit of that. There's a teensy bit of a family dynamic, but early on, it's very off-putting. And if you know the characters like we do, you'll be like, oh, whoa, what are you doing? It's like, really? You jumped to this conclusion? Over what?
Now, granted, if they were just trying to salvage the pre-existing storyboards from
yes.
the dumpster fire early iteration, I can see
I can't imagine what those were like.
Right, like if they didn't have a lot to work with, maybe they tried just to make the best of a very bad situation. But not knowing that in 1998, when I first watched it, not knowing any of this history, just seeing this presented to me cold.
Yep.
Ugh. So
they hit it very well.
So that's basically why I resented the Donkey Kong Country cartoon. And it was just a big slap in the face to this Donkey Kong fan, I can tell you what. But here's the thing, Malik. Here is the cold, hard truth. I didn't actually stop watching it until sometime probably in the late 1999, maybe early 2000.
You were hate watching it before it was cool.
It wasn't even hate watching. It was holding out hope that it would turn itself around, or at least turn itself around to my standards, because it was still a Donkey Kong Country cartoon show. I would still tune in and tape it every Sunday morning when it aired. I would never enjoy it, but I don't know, like, this was around the same time I kept seeing Phantom Menace in theaters, hoping, like, trying to convince myself it was a masterpiece, because I just couldn't accept that the new Star Wars movie was mid, as the kids now say. It was just like, well, this is a Donkey Kong Country cartoon. I need to like it because I love Donkey Kong Country. And, you know, at that age too, you can't just separate things like, oh, well, I just don't like this adaptation. Oh, well, no harm done. I hope some people are getting something out of it. I had to, like, all or nothing. I had to love it, or I had to burn it to the ground.
Mm-hmm. That's how I feel about, I won't get too off topic, but I feel that way about Ratchet and Clank, and when I saw the Ratchet and Clank movie, which was actual garbage on the screen. So yeah, I burned that to the ground, but but I could still like everything else, you know?
So in the live stream, talking about adaptations, Freezer says there were 3 Sonic cartoons in the 90s, and none of them are the same tonally.
That's true, actually. In fact, today's the 30th anniversary of The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog.
Is that the one with Jaleel White?
They all have Jaleel White.
Oh, okay.
That's the first one with, like, Scratch and Grounder, the chicken and the robot.
I'll take your word for it. I don't know what those words mean, but
sorry.
So this episode is not just about my problems historically with the Donkey Kong Country cartoon. It's about of how I eventually made peace with it. And a big component of that is I grew up. I matured. Yeah. I didn't put away childish things as the Bible tells me to do, but I gained perspective on I guess what matters, what doesn't, and I let go of just my stupid little nitpicky ways. Well, not entirely, but where it was holding me back as a human being. And the truth, though, is that this has been a long process of me gradually accepting the Donkey Kong Country cartoon. Not liking it, not loving it, but gradually making peace with it. And most importantly, accepting that other people can really love it and not having to argue with them, not having to make attempts at changing their mind. And this, I didn't even realize when it was happening. This very piecemeal process of me unclenching a little bit when it comes to the cartoon. It was kind of this drip, drip, drip thing. And then eventually my bucket is half full. And I'm like, oh, I got a half full bucket of, I guess, lukewarm opinions on the DKC show. Okay. So this honestly started relatively early on. And if you would have asked me in 1999 if this changed anything, I would have told you no. But in retrospect, it kind of helped just a little bit. And that is when Donkey Kong 64, November 1999, soft canonized certain elements from the cartoon. It didn't make the cartoon necessarily canon, but it took things from the cartoon and kind of laundered them. It kind of put them through the rare wash and made them more palatable to my anti-cartoon brain. So of course, the biggest example, the most obvious one, is taking the crystal coconut, the all-powerful MacGuffin wish-casting device from the cartoon, and turning it into a collectible item, of which there are many in Donkey Kong 64, the crystal coconuts. Multiple crystal coconuts. They're just like these little totems that contain magical energies. They can't like alter the course of reality. Like they can't, change.
Can't smite your enemies.
Yeah, they can't change the fabric of nature. For that, you have to go to Ukulele and the One Book. But the crystal coconuts, they are just these little items you can collect throughout Donkey Kong 64. And in preparation for this episode, I even asked some people at Rare, hey, do you remember why the Donkey Kong 64 team decided to implement crystal coconuts? And I couldn't get a clear answer from the multiple people I asked. Nobody really remembered. The closest thing to a consensus I was able to gather was that when George Andreas took over Donkey Kong 64 sometime in mid to late 1998, he wanted to add more collectibles because the scope of the game changed. It became more like a Banjo-Kazooie game on steroids. And I think they looked to the cartoon for, well, what can we pull from all aspects of Donkey Kong when adding collectibles? And they got the idea of the crystal coconut, and they're like, what if we turn that into a collectible? And so it wasn't just this effort of, well, what if we take elements from the cartoon and make them canon because there might be fans of the cartoon now. It wasn't necessarily that much forward thinking, although there might have been some of that, like, on a more low key scale, because they did look to the cartoon and they, for example, made Cranky Kong a chemist, which, the Cranky in the cartoon is always dabbling with potions, which was not an aspect of the character before the cartoon, but in Donkey Kong 64, they did add that to the character. They essentially made him something of a mad scientist in the game. And that game was full of a lot of wild swings, like making Funky Kong into an arms dealer. But
I remember that from the show.
No, the Funky from the show, he's kind of accurate to the Funky of the games.
Minus the pants.
But even the games kind of made his fur a little bit more blonde in the buyout era.
Yeah.
Just so he's not so visually identical to Donkey Kong. But yeah, no, Chemist Cranky Kong. They also took Dixie Kong's cartoon clothing and they sort of reinterpreted it for Tiny Kong's design.
I can sort of...
So, okay.
That's the only one I'll argue with you on. Yes, it's a flower.
Yes,
and it's white.
Well, Dixie, instead of wearing, like a pink like tied off shirt, as she does in the games, she's wearing a blue sort of tank top with, like a daisy on it, I guess.
Yeah. Like Daisy Kong?
Daisy Kong, as Nintendo Power would call her in the odds. But she's still got a pink beret, so, you know, it just kind of, I don't know why they made that design choice, because it's not like they give...
Yeah, that bothers me.
It's not like they give Diddy Kong, like, the stars on his shirt. He's just got his DKC-1 red shirt.
Yeah.
But they gave Dixie a flower on her shirt. But Tiny's wearing overalls, and they gave her a very similar looking flower on her overalls. Mm-hmm. And I would say that might have been consciously or unconsciously inspired by Cartoon Dixie. I've never got that clarified one way or another, but I think I'm confident enough to chalk it up as a reference. Little reference.
Yeah. If it's true, I'd believe it. I'd also believe them just saying like, "Oh God, should we put something on Tiny's overalls?" Yeah, sure. What do you think she like? Flowers? Yeah, but put a flower on there.
They didn't do that for Lanky Kong or Chunky Kong, like.
Well, it's hard to put that on overall. Well, what? No, crap. She does wear overall. Sorry.
Yeah. There's also, I think, a greater emphasis on Clump and Crusher in the game. Crusher is not a baddie in the game, but he's unlockable in multiplayer. And I feel like that wouldn't have been the case if it wasn't for the cartoon. So they definitely... Yeah. I think they first looked to the cartoon for inspiration on items to add to the game. But from there, they did, say, well, what if we did this? Because, we don't want to alienate people who got into Donkey Kong via the cartoon. And it wasn't this thing where, oh, we hate the cartoon. We need to try to make some of it work within the context of our holy rare canon. Trust me, nobody on the DK64 team was thinking in those terms, but that was DK Vine's take back in 1999. Well, they're obviously adding this because they hate the cartoon, but they want to make it work within the logic of their own canon.
Logic? Canon?
Yeah.
That's what they were thinking.
That was never the case with DK64. But that did help make certain things more palatable for me, even if I didn't recognize it at the time. But It was 2004 where there was a very remote possibility. It was never a real possibility, but it popped into my head and I definitely entertained it. When, Malik, do you remember Game Boy Advance Video?
Yes, I do. I was never... Yeah, I do remember, like, sitting in, like, grade school over the shoulders of friends and watching stuff on GBA Video.
I never owned any of these, but I do remember when they released Pokemon anime episodes on Game Boy Advance cartridges. I think there would be, like, 2 per cartridge. They released several. This is a very cute, novel concept. Like, oh yeah, let's watch cartoons on our Game Boy Advance. But the Game Boy Advance was a wildly successful handheld device. It was a huge defining part of the aughts for those who weren't around. And so it makes sense they could do this, so why not do it? I mean, it was before we could just watch anything we wanted on smartphones, so it makes sense. And there were also, like, I think movies on there. What was Shrek was on it, right? I'm pretty sure
Shrek 1, there was a Shrek 1 and 2 double pack for GBA.
Oh my God.
Can you imagine that? Maybe that's how you should get into the Shrek movies.
How did they even fit Shrek on the...
I don't know. It doesn't flow very well. It doesn't look great. But in 2003, on a dimly or not lit at all GBA, I think that might be heaven for somebody.
It was a miracle age we were living in, that's for sure. But yeah, so seeing like these Pokemon anime cartridges, GBA cartridges on Toys R Us shelves or wherever, I did entertain the very remote possibility we would get the same for Donkey Kong Country. And by DK Vine's logic, by DK Vine's standards for what is and what is not canon, if they released Donkey Kong Country episodes for the Game Boy Advance in a GBA cartridge, well, then we would have to consider those episodes at the very least Donkey Kong canon, DKU. So
I feel like if the show was still running at that time, it eventually would have happened.
Yeah, I think part of the problem was, and I don't know how the rights issues broke down. Like, I feel like Nintendo had much less of a stake in the DKC cartoon than they did the Pokemon anime. So there was that. There was the wonky rights issues. There's the fact that the cartoon had, ended production for several years, and that this was a very awkward point for Donkey Kong as a brand where they were really sure what they wanted it to be, and if Donkey Kong Country, the cartoon, was the best face to put forward when it came to presenting Donkey Kong. Maybe that's not the case, but I just feel like, had this technology been around on the Game Boy Color, we would have potentially seen it.
Can you imagine?
Well, I was thinking back to that Game Boy Color commercial for Donkey Kong Country for the Game Boy Color, where they used the models, the assets from the cartoon for the commercial. Like, that's the closest we've ever come to the cartoon actually intertwining with the games, where they even had cartoon Donkey Kong riding on Rambi for the only time. So...
And in France, they actually did have a couple other commercials with those models, actually. But this is the only one that ever made it stateside.
Yeah. So I was mentally debating what we would do as DK Vine in 2004. So, and a part of me was dreading it. Part of me was hoping it would never happen because I didn't want to deal with the headache. But I have to admit, a larger part of me was actually relishing the challenge. Was actually wanting to say, I have to now sit down with 2 to 4 to 6 episodes of the Donkey Kong Country cartoon and figure out how their full-fledged canon to Rare's video games, to Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, to Donkey Konga, to DK King of Swing, whatever was coming out in that era. Part of me really looked forward to that challenge, and part of me is a little upset it never happened. And I know people out there, given I see in a live stream, would be saying, why don't you just accept that the cartoon is canon and just make it work? And to answer that, I was like, well, I don't have to because it's not. but this would have forced me, and this would have been a fun challenge. And I think that is the first and last time I ever considered how I could potentially fan wank it as canon. So I was doing some very rough draft rudimentary work in my brain space. Like, I would go on these long hikes and I'd be like, all right, think about it, Hyle. Congo Bongo Island could be a separate island from the main Donkey Kong Island, but still part of the DK Isles as established in Donkey Kong 64 and Donkey Kong Country for the Game Boy Color. And, and from there I could go on. But it never came to that, ultimately. But it was the first time, Malik, that I really danced with the devil, where I really attempted to broker a peace with the Donkey Kong Country cartoon in my brain. And then we went our separate ways again. But that era of the buyout years, contentious all around for real and made up reasons, but it also had a small but not insignificant effect on my views of the Donkey Kong Country cartoon, because so much, as I said, of the Rare era stuff was just held up on a pedestal at the time because Rare was the only voice behind Donkey Kong. And the only voice behind the characters they created, like Diddy and, Cranky, who they didn't necessarily create, but they reinterpreted.
Yeah, sort of, kind of.
Yeah. And the buyout era threw a lot of the Rare era stuff into question, not for me, but in the general cultural sense, because, it was a generational turnover. The buyout had happened. So a lot of hardcore Nintendo fans just turned on Rare in the blink of an eye. But even before that, there's kind of lines being drawn because online, kind of gaming culture wars were like viewing, oh, well, I only like games made internally at Nintendo, and Rare's this outside studio, and they only just copy what Nintendo does. Meh. And
I'm so glad I wasn't around for that.
Yeah, it was getting kind of stupid even in the early aughts, but the buyout era just accelerated everything. And then you had, Gen X magazine writers and video game journalists online who weren't into the Rare stuff, and it was sort of influencing the discourse of the younger millennials at the time. And it was just a really hard time to be a fan of Rare in general, because 90s nostalgia hadn't kicked in, and we were still kind of on the outside looking in, those of us who grew up with it. So because of that, I started looking at the Donkey Kong Country cartoon in an entirely new light. And, this was a contentious time for Donkey Kong, and some of that was nonsense. It was stuff like the mistranslated Jungle Beat interview that IGN ran and gave an entirely different context to, an entirely different flavor than what was intended, but it made us think that there was this internal war against Rare characters like Diddy Kong. And it wasn't true, but that's what we were led to believe by trusted sources like IGN. And I didn't speak a lick of, Japanese, so I didn't know.
Yep.
And maybe I reacted to it in a very immature way. But anyway, because of that, I would look at stuff that was drawn from the Rare era with Diddy and Dixie and Cranky and Funky and Candy and Kremlings, even if they weren't called as such, like the cartoon, in a new light. And I was like, well, at least I appreciate that the cartoon, used Donkey Kong characters, Donkey Kong Country characters. And that kind of was a weird feeling to have, where it was like, well, it's not my cup of tea. It's not the way I would have done it. It's not my favorite interpretation of them, but at least they're all there.
Yeah, that's what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, there's even current stuff out there, and it's like, wow, even the DKC cartoon uses these characters more than Nintendo does these days.
Right. I mean, I very much adore Donkey Kong Country Returns and Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. I do. Like, let's not make that an open question, because it's not. I adore those games, but it is like a bit weird, like you couldn't use anybody else, like,
nope.
Yeah. And I know, like, the cartoon doesn't use any animal buddies, but it's just like,
at least they thought about them.
At least, yeah, right. I mean, I'm sure Retro thought about Ingard, from time to time, but
yeah, what's your excuse? You had a budget. Would it kill you to put Winky up on the wall or something in a drawing or something?
Right, at least, yeah. At least Rambi was referenced on the emblem on the carts in the Super Mario Brothers movie.
Yeah.
But Malik, as I've said this before, it was the smash ballots of the mid-2010s and the war to get K. Rool recognized by Nintendo. So kind of apropos of the Retro Studios discussion we just had, it really made me reconsider not what the Donkey Kong Country cartoon meant for me, but what it actually did mean for other fans. So this is where I stopped being so damn selfish. Because the thing is, it is fully within my right to dislike the Donkey Kong Country cartoon. It's not for me. It's just really not my thing. But the same way that the Super Mario Brothers Super Show hit me at just the right age for it to be this kind of defining, inspiring portrait of Mario and Luigi and the Mushroom Kingdom gang, so too was the Donkey Kong Country cartoon for so many other people who were younger than me. And it influenced their perceptions on the Kongs and the Kremlings and just the world of Donkey Kong. I think I was just the wrong age and of the wrong mindset when it came to the US. I think I was just too old and too passionate about the source material in a way that I never was for Mario when I first saw the Super Show. Like, I really, really liked Mario. I loved Super Mario Brothers and Super Mario Brothers 2, Super Mario USA. But I jumped into all of that in the late 1980s when I was a very, 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 very little kid. I was super young, preschool age, didn't even, know my full ABCs when I was first playing Mario. So, I would have my dad read me the instruction manuals because I wanted to know more about what was going on in the games. So, I had no true conception of the Mushroom Kingdom or Subcon, so the cartoon helped shore it up for me in a way that the games never did. The Donkey Kong Country cartoon could not do that for me because it was already this gospel truth for me. Everything that the instruction manuals and the games said, and even Rareware, the website, said, which I read, a short month or two before I first watched the Donkey Kong Country cartoon. The DKC2 cartoon could not penetrate any of that for me. It could only irritate me for what it wasn't.
And I get that, because, like I said before, I was not in that position. I just saw the cartoon one day and I was like, oh, cool, there's another thing of that thing that I like.
Right.
But, if DKC hit me at my core and I had stuck around with it for a few years and then saw that with no prior anything, it would steer me away too.
But I understand, I really started to get what people saw in the Donkey Kong Country cartoon that I never could. Yeah. When the Smash ballot really became this all hands on deck, mobilizing effort to get King K. Rool into Smash Brothers. And there's never been anything like this in our fandom, especially because we all kind of mobilized around one character. Even those who wanted Dixie Kong more than K. Rool, or, within the same realm, Banjo and Kazooie. So many people who were fans of DK or the broader DKU got behind K. Rool because we recognized, well, that would be the cooler, I think, inclusion, and it would mean the most for the series. So, everybody got behind K. Rool, and that support came not just from the games, but the cartoon as well, because people were using the cartoon to explain to people who had never gotten into Donkey Kong K. Rool's potential, right? K. Rool, who had not been in a Donkey Kong game since Donkey Kong Barrel, it was Jet Race, Barrel Blast, Barrel
Jungle Climber? Which one came first?
Well, it depends where you live, which came first. So Jungle Climber, and then what's known as Jet Race in some territories, and Barrel Blast in other territories. I always want to call it Barrel Race because that makes more sense for what's happening in the game, but it's Barrel Blast. But
Jet Blast, in some territories.
And K. Rool also appeared in Mario Sluggers. Appeared in that was his last appearance, but he hadn't been in Returns. He wasn't in Tropical Freeze. So even those who liked those Donkey Kong games hadn't been exposed to K. Rool. And so it's like, well, how do you explain the innate appeal of this character and what makes him so special compared to characters like Bowser? And so, they used the video games to explain it. Like, oh, he's got this personality disorder and he shifts. Each failure compounds it, and he goes from a pirate to a mad scientist to a boxer. But they also used the cartoon. And they were using like memes from the cartoon and video clips. And that was able to sway enough people that he was worthy enough. And so people who weren't even Donkey Kong fans fell in love with K. Rool. And they got behind him in the Smash ballot. And that's when I realized, oh wow, Mamie, just Mamie, the Donkey Kong Country cartoon can actually be a force for good. I never thought about it like that. It had only been a source of evil in my world.
Because I felt the same way. Not the source of evil, but like memes. Yeah.
It was actually bringing people joy and happiness. And it was getting people excited about K. Rool. Like in a video game context. Oh my God, I had never considered this before.
Mm-hmm. Like just, even I did that for like Smash Brothers 4, one of my earliest videos. I was like, K. Rool is so great. Can we please have his voice from the cartoon? I that was one of my first like rallies for K. Rool back in the day in my YouTube career. But yeah, people really jumped on it with Smash Ultimate, and it was really great to see.
And yeah, like the thing is, we thought we failed when the Smash ballot completed, and they like announced that Bayonetta was in the game, and then here's Cloud or whatever. But it turns out we actually succeeded, and that K. Rool actually like more or less, depending, people can split hairs, who won what, depending on what territory. But K. Rool was a winner of the Smash ballot, and he got into Super Smash Brothers Ultimate as a result. And I don't think he would have if it wasn't for the cartoon. And so I mentioned this at our MagFest panel that Cameron and I did in January 2020, before the pandemic shut down the world. I said, one of the people in the audience, when we were taking Q&A, they asked me what I thought about the Donkey Kong Country cartoon, because up until that point it hadn't come up. And I was honest. I was like, look, it's not for me. I'm not a fan of it. But, actually, I've come around on it a little bit because I recognize what it means for so many. And it got K. Rool into Smash Brothers, and it basically saved K. Rool as a character in the video games as a result. And so because of that, even though it's never going to be for me, I can recognize what it means for others. And that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be tailored for me. Not everything has to be tailored for me, Hyle Russell, from off of DK Vine.
Mm-hmm.
So that is my mature take on the subject. But two things this year, Malik, have tipped me even further in the camp of, well, I'm glad the cartoon exists, I guess.
What would those be?
The Super Mario Brothers movie, for me, did portray an emotional arc, an emotional relationship between the characters of Donkey Kong and Cranky Kong that was far more faithful to the games than anything that the original Donkey Kong Country cartoon ever did. And it also had a cameo from Diddy and Dixie, and also Chunky and Swanky. I finally got Swanky Kong in a cartoon, Malik. So finally my 25-year-old wish had come true. But the Super Mario Brothers movie also heavily deviated from video game continuity. You have the Jungle Kingdom instead of Donkey Kong Island, and it sort of sledgehammered elements from Donkey Kong Arcade and Donkey Kong Jr. and Donkey Kong Country into the events of Super Mario Brothers. And me being a somewhat rational adult these days, I still enjoyed it very much. I still went into it and I was like, you know what? That was a good bit of fan service there. I have problems with the screenplay. It's not like a brilliant piece of cinema, but I enjoyed it for what it was, right?
Yeah.
It brought me joy to see so many beloved elements on the big screen, even in a new context, in a new light, in a new interpretation. And so if I could enjoy that, why can't I at the very least appreciate what the cartoon did 25 years ago, 26 years ago, 27 years ago, depending on where you live? Why can't I look back on it and just let go and say, well, it is what it is?
I really don't know. I'm going to say maybe just because, I mean, it hurt you so bad.
Well, yeah,
at
like
the time.
I think it's just one of those things where it's going to take a little bit more time. But at the very least, I can look back on it now, and things like Congo Bongo Island don't irritate me as much because, well, now we've had two radically different interpretations of where Donkey Kong lives. They changed Donkey Kong Island again, because they wanted to be consistent with the Mushroom Kingdom and everything else. And, you know, it works just as well there as Congo Bongo Island works for the cartoon. So, you know, shut up. Shut up, Hyle.
Let us do our thing. Let us be creative.
Plus, as much as I was, you know, okay with Seth Rogen and Fred Armisen as Donkey and Cranky and thought they were fun takes on the character, let's be honest amongst ourselves, amongst all the friends here in Kongversation land. I think the cartoon voice cast, the English voice cast, was superior. I think it captured the characters' essences in a more authentic way. I think cartoon Donkey Kong and cartoon Cranky Kong, I think they are far more true to video game Donkey Kong and video game Cranky Kong than what Rogen and Armisen brought to the table.
Mm-hmm.
That's not me bad-mouthing what Rogen and Armisen did. I like Bernie Sanders' Cranky Kong as much as the next person, but yeah, I really have come around to the opinion that, you know what, for as much as I had an issue with the cartoon, I never really had an issue with the voice cast.
Nope, I think they are like the strongest aspect of the show, in my opinion, because it's all directed very well. And yeah, when I first heard DK talk as a child, I was like, that is the voice that I would imagine Donkey Kong would have. And even when the show wasn't in my public like consciousness, if that's the proper term I'm supposed to use here, when I just read stuff out as like DK, I just always remember what he sounded like in the TV show. And yeah, it's I love them. I love them all. And bonus points for it being like a Toronto voice cast, and a couple of the people in that production of the voice cast know people that I know, and it's kind of cool.
Look at you name dropping, Malik.
Yeah, look at me. I'm big. I do Did You Know gaming stuff, man. I can do it. I've earned it.
Yeah, like Richard Yearwood's Donkey Kong. I didn't like it at the time. But looking back on it now, yeah, that's Donkey Kong. And, you know, I mentioned on the last episode when we talked about Charles Martinet retired from Donkey Kong, I said that, you know, he did his own take on Donkey Kong, 1994, for like conventions and what have you. He voiced Donkey Kong, and he kind of hit on, you know, passersby, and I said, you know, it was kind of different from what Richard Yearwood did and what Grant Kirkhope did, but there is a kind of a through line there between Charles Martinet's interpretation and Richard Yearwood's interpretation of Donkey Kong. There are certain notes, there are certain like vocal motifs that they both employ. It's like, okay, you know, something in the air, something in the universe just tells people this is what Donkey Kong sounds like.
Yeah,
I dig it.
Just like a cool, almost surfer-like, not quite, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. And of course, Grant Kirkhope would bring a far more like rough, deep-throated take on Donkey Kong, which has continued to this day. But you know, I think as a more like mellow version of Donkey Kong, Richard Yearwood, I have come to terms with, and you know, as much as in my head, K. Rool is kind of the Dr. Claw Bond villain from Donkey Kong 64. Benedict Campbell, I think, is most people's preferred take on K. Rool, and I recognize, I recognize the brilliance behind it.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic. I can't imagine anybody like we talked about in the Mario movie conversation. We were like, who would you want to voice K. Rool or whoever in a Mario movie? And I was like, I can't imagine anybody but Benedict Campbell. It's just he's perfect.
Yeah, well, and that's what the other thing that happened this year that helped tip me into cartoon camp is that Return to Crocodile Isle, the fan-produced animation, which kind of serves as a spiritual sequel to the Donkey Kong Country cartoon, but also marries it more to the video game canon. And I was watched that, and I mentioned this in our interview with the crew behind that, and I said, yeah, with a few little tweaks here or there, I think I would actually dig the Donkey Kong Country cartoon. Like, even it being a giant musical number, I was like, yeah, with the right presentation, with the right thought behind it, without them just stopping everything and breaking out into song very abruptly. I kind of like Donkey Kong as a musical. I see it now. I get it. All you had to do was just frame it with Crocodile Isle and fill it with Kremlings from the various games who never made it into the cartoon. And apparently
set the island on fire.
Yeah. Apparently I'm a soft touch. And then, Malik, I sort of just let the rest of my anger, my blazing inferno within me, I let it get snuffed out at long last, to the point where I feel no hostility towards the cartoon anymore. I have, in all actuality, made peace with it. And when I realized that, I was like, well, damn. I should do an episode about the cartoon with Malik, because I this is the first time in 25 years where I just feel completely neutral about it. And, I'm not loving it, but I also feel no hostility. I feel no anger. I feel no ill will towards it whatsoever. And I'm like, wow, it only took me a quarter of a century, 1/4 of a long-lived person's life, to get here. But I got here.
Some people don't get there at all.
Again, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to be queuing up episodes of this on Prime Video or whatever and having a marathon viewing or anything. But I can do a conversation about it with you. Maybe even I'll record an audio commentary for an episode or two down the line. Who knows? But I also want to make clear that I also get it now. I understand everybody who has ever listened to an episode of The Kongversation or who has read DK Vine and has chafed at our hostility towards the cartoon. I get why you would feel put off or put out by that nowadays. I understand that, if it hit you at just the right age, or you weren't just a tightly wound weirdo like I was, you would have really liked the cartoon. It would have been a defining block, a defining pillar in your Donkey Kong fandom. And it must have sucked to have the big Donkey Kong fan site besmirch it at all times. So let me just say that I am done ragging on the old girl. I'm not gonna go after it anymore. I have signed peace accords with the Donkey Kong Country cartoon. From this day on, we will coexist far apart, but still.
I was about to say harmony might be stretching.
Right. It's going to be a tentative peace. We're laying down arms.
That's good enough. I'm proud of you.
So we do have calls to take, Malik, because those aforementioned fans of the cartoon, I feel like wanted to get some words in, not knowing where I was going to go with this episode. So I want to hear what each person has to say. And I want you to hear what they have to say too, Malik. And
All right.
why don't we go ahead and play the first call? I do want to remind people that if you want to hear yourself on the conversation, feel free to call the DK Vine hotline at 1-202-630-VINE. That is 8463. Give us a call. You can call at any time about any topic, but generally we only play the calls pertaining to the topic at hand. So when we announce the topic of the conversation on social media and say we are taking calls on this episode, and we tell you when we're recording, just get your call in before then, and we will generally play it. Sometimes people call in a bit too late, and we don't get to actually play those calls, but, you can call in whenever you want, and we'll eventually maybe play your call, even if it doesn't pertain to the topic that we're discussing. But Malik, are you ready for the first call?
Ready as I'll ever be.
Well, okay then. Let's play it.
I shower you with coconut cream pies.
I was not ready for that.
Yeah, that was the extent of the call. Thank you, caller.
Well, what? I don't even know what to say. I've never found that line insanely funny, but
I mean, I get it. I understand why people snicker at it. It's just one of those memes that is funny inherently, like Donkey Kong's ass.
yeah, that one's okay. But Donkey Kong's butt has always been good, no matter what.
Yeah.
But that one,
Yeah.
that one makes me roll my eyes.
Well, then let's play the second call.
Hey, Hyle. Hope the move-in is less torturous than you thought it would be. I've been there, and it's just the worst. Like leaving out of boxes. I've been there. As for the cartoon, just want to give my thoughts really quick. I'm fond of it. I wouldn't call it good because it isn't, but some of like the super elements of it and like just how obscure it is and how much it doesn't fit in with the rest of like the Donkey Kong universe, which I know is a turn off for you. It sort of like draws me in. I've always been interested in the sort of obscure stuff about like worlds that I like. Maybe that's because I've spent my entire childhood in Mario with games just learning about all these like obscure games and elements that I wasn't playing with myself, but it was like stuff before my era that I was just interested in learning in, and the cartoon really fits into that. And overall, I wouldn't want the cartoon to be like the focus of the games or the other media, but a world without Bluster Kong or British K. Rool or, to put it pointedly, tip the scale is not a world that I want to live in. So I want to end off with a quick question. If a Donkey Kong movie or show needed to take one like substantial element from the old show, otherwise it wouldn't get made, and it was up to you, what would you want that element to be?
Oh, thank you for the call. This is a good question, and it's kind of similar to something I've queued up for the end of this episode, but not specifically this. So, like let's say the rumored Donkey Kong movie from Illumination, assuming it ever happens now, assuming the strikes ever end, it has to take one element from the cartoon or it won't get made. And this is also a tricky question because this would be ignoring any potential like rights issues. Like, does Nelvana have like partial ownership of Bluster Kong? Like, is that a Nintendo character? We still don't really have any clear answers to this. And I pride myself on knowing who owns what. Like, I have a whole internal spreadsheet about what characters are owned by Rare versus what characters are owned by Nintendo. But yeah, we don't really know like how much they could actually utilize from this adaptation of Donkey Kong. And you see this in other things like Batman. It's hard for the Batman comics to sometimes utilize things that were created in other media. Like sometimes they do the work like, and bring characters in, but there are characters from like the Adam West Batman show that they historically have not been able to use, at least faithfully, because of rights issues. So,
yeah,
I don't know, but let's ignore all of that. One element from the cartoon, Malik, you go first.
Okay, so first thing that comes to my mind is I would want K. Rool to still be posh and like, classy and maybe have like a British accent. I just feel like that just works for K. Rool for me, and I would love to see that on like the big screen. And like how we said in our conversation on the movie, someone like Andy Serkis would work as K. Rool.
Yeah.
He would bring a lot to that character.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, definitely for sure. For me, mine might seem like a cop-out at first, but hear me out.
Okay.
I would want Funky Kong as a stoner. Now, I say that because the cartoon interpretation of Funky Kong, I feel like, is the first interpretation of Funky Kong that really leaned into that more. Like, he was a kind of a California surfer pastiche in Donkey Kong Country. And there's a lot more going on for Funky Kong than just surfer dude. You know, he's a brilliant mechanic, he's an entrepreneur, but I think like the cartoon, it reinterpreted him as kind of like this Rastafarian, and there was an implicit weed joke that made me laugh that you brought up, Malik, when you were on the conversation. And I was
never seen green clouds before. Well, maybe once.
So I think like I'm okay with that interpretation of Funky Kong now. Like, I wouldn't want that just to be the whole basis of the character. Like, I still want him to be like a genius mechanic and owning an airline and whatever. But yeah, I feel like that is the one element that the cartoon explicitly brought to the forefront that I would be okay with for other adaptations.
Yeah.
All right, well,
I can see where you're coming from that. Yeah, good stuff.
See, I feel like the caller wanted me to say Bluster Kong, but I was not going to say Bluster Kong. Thank you for the call, caller. We'll get back to Bluster Kong and my feelings on him potentially becoming canon in the future in just a little bit. Okay, let's take our next call.
Hi, Hyle and Malik. This is Thomas of the Kremlin Campaigners. I hope you both are doing well. I'm definitely interested in hearing you both unpack your experiences with the DKC animated series over the years, which, Hyle, I hope this helps you kind of lay to rest the whole meme of, oh, DK Vine hates the cartoon. DK Vine only acknowledges it as Lord Harry. Because I know you've been at peace with it for some time, just had to kind of get it out there in more sustained fashion. On my end, my first exposure to the cartoon was seeing DK's face smirking at me from off of the box of The Legend of the Crystal Coconut at Blockbuster Video. Then a few years later, after I got into the internet fandom space, I would kind of watch episodes as kind of a silly nighttime routine, just as, a form of escapism, if you will. Something I know has been said and can personally vouch for is the cartoon's key role in the Bring Back K. Rool movement. You, of course, have a number of K. Rool fans just of his portrayal in the show, which is even more evident after the hype around Benedict Campbell showing up in Return to Crocodile Isle. But more than that, I think the cartoon helped the fans make the case that K. Rool deserves a future as DK's main villain in a way it would be harder to do just based on the games. His face time in the trilogy is confined just to the boss fights at the end, where you get cutscenes in DK64. It's easier for detractors to just dismiss it as unimportant that way. But in the cartoon, he's only one of 3 characters to appear prominently in every single episode, alongside DK and Diddy. No coincidence there that they're now the 3 playable representatives for the series in Smash Ultimate. As a cherry on top, his eye-twitching animations in Smash are something he's only ever done in the cartoon. I'll always appreciate that became part of Sakurai's vision for the character, on top of all his other winks and nods. In any case, I rambled enough. I'm looking forward to seeing the episode, and knock on wood, some substantive DK news in the months ahead. See ya.
Well, thank you for the call, Thomas. And yeah, we did touch upon the substantial role the cartoon did play in the Bring Back K. Rool movement, of which you were, of course, at the forefront. I think it's interesting, Malik, just thinking about it a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't really see reinterpretations or characters that were featured so prominently in adaptations of other properties, video game properties, that is, necessarily get the same glow up in prominence in the games that K. Rool did because of the cartoon. For example, the Super Mario Brothers Super Show. I've mentioned it a few times on this episode, but that is like the comparable thing for me. As somebody who considered myself a pretty serious Mario fan until I eschewed all of that when Donkey Kong Country came out. The Super Mario Brothers Super Show was like a very influential interpretation. I considered it like the definitive take on Mario, and it really colored my views on the games and skewed how important I viewed some characters versus others. For example, the character of Mouser from Super Mario Brothers 2. I thought that was like a hardcore, big time, serious top 10 Mario character, because Mouser was King Koopa's sort of right-hand lieutenant in the Super Mario Brothers Super Show, which is not a role he ever had in the games. I mean, he was part of Wart's crew, the 8-bit gang in Super Mario Brothers 2, never worked with the Koopa troupe, except in the cartoon. But because the cartoon said Mouser was so important, I thought he would always be around. I thought like Mouser would just show up in things. And it just gradually dawned on me sometime around the N64 era that, nobody at Nintendo actually gives a damn about Mouser. I think that might have just been an invention of Deke.
I get that. But I think Mouser is actually pretty cool.
No arguments there. If I had like editorial oversight of the Mario franchise for one game, I'd be bringing back Mouser. But my point is, like, you don't see people like advocating for Mouser. Let's bring back Mouser because he was really important in the Super Mario Brothers Super Show, or Fry Guy. Fry Guy was really cool. I'm just talking about Super Mario Brothers 2 bosses, but they were all very prevalent in the Super Show. Or Milli Vanilli. I want Milli Vanilli in a Mario game. You don't see that, and even things like the reinterpretation of Bowser as King Koopa and all of his various tics and foibles in the animated shows. Like, you're not seeing Bowser's popularity ever buoyed by that, or like Dennis Hopper's portrayal in the live action Mario movie. I don't know if it's a uniquely Donkey Kong Country fandom thing for the cartoon to lift K. Rool up out of the scrap heap as it did, but I am all the more grateful that it did. As somebody who is a fan of video game K. Rool, I will always be grateful to cartoon K. Rool for helping bring back the former.
Yeah. And maybe if Bowser had been out of commission for like 20 years, and maybe if it was the other way around, where K. Rool was always around and Bowser wasn't in Ultimate, people would be using the Super Show to advocate for his spot in the game. I feel like that would happen because, I really like Bowser in the Super Show. He's got a lot of great qualities too.
Well, I mean, Bowser, aka King Koopa in the Super Show, if you think about it, he's essentially just K. Rool.
Yeah, he's green.
He's a prototype K. Rool because he takes on a new persona every episode, and he visually looks more similar to K. Rool than he does Bowser. So, but I think an interesting thought experiment would be what if like the Super Show didn't use Bowser whatsoever and it used Wart, or what if another Mario cartoon came along and used Tatanga from Super Mario Land? Like, what if we had a big advocacy campaign for one of Mario's like non-Bowser enemies that then fell by the wayside? Ultimately, we don't know, but just a thought experiment, but it's kind of similar to what happened with K. Rool, so.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for the call, Thomas. All right, one more call, Malik, and then we are going to play a little game, you and I. We are going to have a little round robin session of what aspects from the cartoon would we be okay with becoming video game canon.
That sounds pretty fun.
It will be pretty fun. Let's give our last caller the time of day first, though.
Sure.
Hey, friends. This is KRDS here, talking about the greatest yellow VHS tape of all time. Trust your eyes, the mirror never lies. I can't believe that Nintendo signed off on making a Donkey Kong musical show, which kind of does a perfect job embodying all the weird and beautiful crevices that make up Donkey Kong Country. Emphasis on music, Cranky Kong just being a total old bat. Me and my brother loved the crap out of this VHS tape back in the day. I really just want to know what your guys' favorite songs were from it. And I can't wait to listen to this.
Freezer in the live stream says, even your calls are musicals.
It's true.
Yeah, I really stepped in.
Brings it out of people.
So I have to be honest. I have to be upfront. I'm sorry, DKRDS. I do not have a favorite song from the cartoon because I've not committed any to memory, because I think my brain has purposely excised them to keep my sanity at the time. I'm sorry, I cannot answer this, but Malik, I'm sure you have something ready to go.
Sure. I've got quite a few that I've accumulated over the years. Pirate Scorn, what was the other one? The other pirate song. Lying Booty Boogie. That's the one. The Mirror Never Lies, as the caller was singing. Congo Bongo National Anthem, and the one that I was singing to myself all day today in preparation for this episode and the video I'm making was Monkey Business, where Diddy turns invisible in the very first episode that you saw.
Oh, yeah.
And I was just, like I said, Donkey Kong's singing voice, Sterling Jarvis, he really carried that song. And throughout the whole day, I was just singing to myself, you can't get away with this monkey business.
Oh, my God.
And I was just like, this is so beautiful.
You just took me back to August 15th, 1998. And I just remembered how I was recoiling on the living room floor. You sang it beautifully. I don't want to make you think that you did anything wrong just now.
No, that's fine. I'm just glad I didn't, make you catatonic or anything.
I would guess if I had to choose, once again, coconut gun to my head, it would probably be Pirate Scorn, just because of the Ailstorm connection, and then that, of course, eventually, in a roundabout way, led us to Return to Crocodile Isle. But yeah, I don't really have one. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I filled in for both of us.
I appreciate it. My go-to cheesy, terrible Donkey Kong song is the DK rap. I'm a game purist. What can I say?
Can you imagine if Monkey Business showed up in the Mario movie? What would you have done in the theater then?
You know what?
Leave.
I don't know if there's any way to answer that. I think it just has to be an experiment that has to be tested in real time for us to know for sure. So
if I get into a position of power for DK, I'm going to put that song somewhere.
Yeah, if you get in a position of power with DK and that's what you do with it, we're going to have some words, you and I, Malik. So
I can't wait.
With this new, kinder, gentler version of myself, vis-a-vis the Donkey Kong Country cartoon, it does beg the question, what elements from the cartoon would I be okay with becoming video game canon? Now, this does not mean, in my opinion, canonizing the cartoon, but taking show-exclusive elements and bringing them into the games, perhaps in a slightly tweaked context, similar to the Crystal Coconuts or Chemist Cranky. So I thought we would go down the list, Malik. I provided you with a list. You can ask me one by one and maybe even chime in with your own thoughts on the subject.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds good.
All right.
So let's start with Bluster Kong.
Oh boy. All right. So I front loaded it here, did I? Okay. So
Yeah, you did.
Yeah. Bluster Kong is sort of what I view as the epitome of everything I did not like about the Donkey Kong Country cartoon. He was an original Kong created for the show. And I don't know, like there's something about it that always rubbed me the wrong way. And I couldn't articulate it back then. And I think it's only like viewing it in retrospect that I don't like that. I feel like Bluster Kong was coded as this antagonistically gay character. Even though he was Candy's romantic interest, he was still like stereotypically coded as basically a gay male. And I don't know if I viewed it as sort of like subtle like gay bashing or something, but I feel like you can make the character work a little bit, but maybe don't have him be just so stereotypical. Like even talking about like his mother and just these very like, I don't know. It just very like overwrought stereotypes that I feel like we've moved past in the last 25 years. I think you could make the character Bluster Kong work, but maybe lean in on him being a little bit snootier versus some of what was perceived as, effeminate traits.
So as I've been watching the show, he's very snooty, and everyone gives him crap as they rightfully should.
Yeah. So
I kind of like that's his role. Just everyone hates him.
I think like again, like don't make him so antagonistic. Like part of the appeal of the Kong family is that they generally all get along. So maybe have Bluster Kong be sort of like the Niles Crane of the group, where you can still give him this sort of refinement, this upper crust sort of flaunciness, but without coding him as just such a like stereotypical, he's everything Donkey Kong isn't, even in like just the way he carries himself. Like have him be sort of like the lovable snob versus the snob who is there as a rival.
Yeah. And I would like a name that ends in an E, because that's the one thing that always gets me.
Blusty Kong.
Blusty
Kong, yeah.
Blusty Kong.
Now you can have Kongs.
Snooty Kong.
You can have Kongs that don't end with the Y sound. Like it has been known to happen. But I think Bluster Kong was one of the first, at the very least, at the time. Like since then we've gotten Karate Kong and Dread Kong but yeah, Bluster Kong, whatever. I think you can make him work. You would just have to reinterpret him, kind of rebuild him from the ground up, because I don't know, something about him kind of rubs me the wrong way. And maybe don't have him be a romantic rival. Like he could just be gay. Like we need more and out and open gay characters in Nintendo games. So like he doesn't have to be after Candy Kong. He doesn't have to be there as a rival of Donkey Kong. He could just be a gay man who is part of the gang.
So let's see. Next thing, the Barrel Factory.
Yeah.
What do you think?
The Barrel Factory. I like a lot of people have said, well, you didn't like the Barrel Factory. I really like that we saw where they made the barrels. I guess, like in retrospect, it's okay. The problem is factories are always, they're always kind of viewed in the context of the video games as something the enemy puts on the island. So if you could do a barrel factory in a very eco-friendly way, I would.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a factory.
Yeah. Just where they make the barrels.
Like a shack.
Barrel shack. Yeah, exactly. I don't want it to step too much on the toes of the Juicy Jungle Factory from Tropical Freeze, which was a, ecologically friendly, one with nature factory, as opposed to the factories that the Kremlings run. So yeah, just where they make the barrels, that'd be fine. If that's Bluster's role, fine. I would be okay with that. Just maybe not make it a one-to-one factory, because I feel like factories on Donkey Kong Island are generally a bad thing.
Yeah.
industrialization that isn't like wood and coconuts. Like even a conveyor belt is kind of like, I don't know. Seems pretty suspicious.
What if it was made out of like wood?
Maybe. Well, like if it could be like a more Flintstones thing where it's like powered by, like birds or something. I don't know.
Now let's see. Here's a big one. Eddie the Mean Old Yeti.
Eddie the Mean Old Yeti. I believe Eddie the Mean Old Yeti was in that first episode I watched.
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
Terrible song.
So yeah, I was like, wow, you're just hitting me with a Sasquatch character, like right out of the gate. So I've been on record as saying like Eddie is actually a character I wouldn't mind so much, even more so than like taking Bluster Kong. I feel like Eddie, you could maybe just like drop in like as is, maybe with a little visual tweak here or there. Like I don't mind the idea of a Yeti who lives in the snowy regions of Donkey Kong Island. Now, to be fair, DK King of Swing did give us Sassy Squatch.
Sassy
Squatch. So, I don't know if he has already been rendered redundant because of Sassy Squatch. Maybe we just need to do more with Sassy Squatch. Again, we already have toys. Maybe we should play with the toys we have at home rather than asking for a brand new Eddie the Mean Old Yeti. But yeah, like I like having a Kong who is like explicitly a cryptoid, like a mythological ape, like a Bigfoot or a Yeti or a skunk ape or something like that. I think that's a fun concept that hasn't really been done. Banjo-Tooie had the had the Yetis in Hailfire Peaks, but as far as the Donkey Kong series proper, it hasn't really been done, and I don't think Sassy Squatch necessarily counts. So
no, I'm looking at him. He's terrifying. That is not a Kong. That is a monster.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll put Eddie in the maybe column. If we can find a way to make him work alongside Sassy Squatch, I think I would feel better about it.
Okay. Now, even just saying this just kills me inside a little bit. Inka Dinka Doo.
Nope. Nope.
Thank you. That's the correct
So I
answer.
think the term Inka Dinka Doo was some sort of novelty song from the 1950s. If I recall, that's actually the origin of it. But it's just like, no, it's just one of those, like, we're gonna take these broad stereotypes, from like Africa or South America, and we're gonna give it a funny name. And even Juju the Totem Pole, I'm just kind of like, maybe not so much. Like, I don't think Mumbo Jumbo, the character, is necessarily problematic these days because he's just such a cartoony figure. But just Inka Dinka Doo, I don't know. I think he's kind of stupid.
Yeah, I hate saying his name so much.
Yeah, it's kind of a stinka poo.
Oh God, yeah.
Plus, we already have like these kind of like possessed artifacts in the Tiki Tak tribe. We have stuff like this in the DK series already. I don't think we need Inka Dinka Doo muddying the waters anymore.
Yeah, I'm looking it up on Wikipedia, and it says, for the temple god from the Donkey Kong Country TV series. Like, no, that's too far. That's way too far.
Yeah.
So let's see. Congo Bongo Island.
No, I'm sorry. Like, at this point, I can recognize that Donkey Kong Island is a terrible name, but it's been the name we've had for nearly 30 years.
No one else had to change their names.
Right, exactly. It's still the Mushroom Kingdom. It's still Donkey Kong Island to me. Congo Bongo Island. Plus, it gets even more confusing because we have the Congo Jungle. We have DK Bongos. Let's not muddy the waters anymore. As I said, like, Congo Bongo Island maybe worked for the cartoon, but I will always go to bat for Donkey Kong Island in the games.
Yeah, same here. Let's see now. General Clump and Crusher as K. Rool's right hands.
Yeah, I would be okay with this.
Yeah, me too.
I think maybe give Crusher a rank as well. Cause I like the idea of General Clump to like put him apart from other clumps. Like he is the general of the clumps. Maybe have it be like Sergeant Crusher or something, just something, or even just give them like unique names, but it's still a clump in Crusher and everyone knows what they're doing with it. Cause I do like when Kremlings have unique names like Crunch. Crunch is ostensibly a critter, but you don't call him Critter. He's Crunch. So maybe give them their own names. I do know, like, I think the Donkey Kong 64 instruction manual, like, referenced the Clump who talks to K. Rool at the beginning as General Clump. So Rare's already kind of tiptoed up to this point, but yeah, I would be fine with having K. Rool have, like, people to talk off of, to have, like, banter with in cutscenes and what have you. I think it works.
Yeah, I think so too. Let's see, next one. Captain Scurvy.
Nah, I'm sorry. So again, I feel like this is just purely because we already have a toy box that the games provided us with, and this would just confuse things already. I feel like if you were to bring back Pirate Kremlings as a separate faction, you have a ready-made character in Klubba to kind of serve as their leader, their ruler, their captain. So Captain Scurvy, plus we already have a Scurvy crew in Donkey Kong Country Returns. They're a bunch of crabs. Captain Greenbeard or whatever. So it's already like, I feel like this is taking pieces that were used back in the day and have been used since, and it's just a redundant, unnecessary character.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, one episode reveals that Scurvy and Clump are brothers, so...
Yeah, I mean, considering Captain Scurvy is just a cannon from Donkey Kong Country 2, and cannons are just clumps dressed as pirates, that does make me feel a little bit better. Captain Scurvy worked for the cartoon, sure, but the games, I don't feel like there's that much room for him.
Yeah. So let's see. Next one up, Polly Roger.
Nope. You Screech. Screech. Yeah.
Yep. It's like he was right there. Come on now.
Yeah.
Ugh. Now let's see. Finally, musical numbers.
Malik, the only musical numbers I will allow in Donkey Kong games is genuine Donkey Kong music. Genuine Donkey Kong music like Smash Mouth's All-Star, as seen in the North American version of Donkey Konga 2. Rest in peace, Steve Harwell.
Somebody once told me the world is gonna roll me.
This has been a File 2 production.
Que rico.